is that just the harmony created by these little patterns of light and dark, I think it's very satisfying to the eye. I think it's delightful to the eye.
Well, we are live on day number 151. We have a special guest today, Patricia Watwood. Patty, welcome.
Hi.
So I understand that you're not in your studio right now. Where are you?
Well, I am in St. Louis, and St. Louis is actually my hometown where my parents live. And I come here every August to spend time with them. And even now, like, we kind of did some testing and came to visit and have been very careful about it. But I'm so excited to be able to spend some time with my family even now. And I have taught an in-person workshop here in St. Louis at the Gateway Academy of Classical Art. And they have a large space, and we did just 6 people all spaced out with like space between their easels and masks. So it was the first time I was able to do something in person like that. It was really fun.
Yeah, I'll bet. I think we're all craving human contact.
Yeah. There's nothing like the energy of a studio, and working together and, having a live model was the first time I've really been able to have a live model on a project for a little while. So
were you rusty?
Yes, in some ways. Although in the time since the pandemic started, I've been switched over my teaching to doing a lot of online.
Right.
So I've actually have still been really working on my practice and doing drawing and painting. So fortunately not as rusty, since I was able to kind of keep going. And early in August, I actually also did a figure painting in plein air project that I think I sent you some images.
We're gonna show those in a few minutes.
And
why don't we do this? I'll drop you off real quickly. I'll do some announcements, and then we'll bring you back on. What are you going to talk about today?
I want to talk about some ideas about how to jumpstart composition. I have been using both thumbnails, and also there's this thing called Notan, which is a black and white thumbnail, to figure out compositions when I'm starting a project. And I think it's really useful to learn composition. And I think it's a great way to kind of warm up when you're getting started and sort of need a place to start and get into your work.
Where did you and I first meet? I'm trying to remember where it was. Was it at the New York Academy?
Or was it maybe at the National Arts Club?
National Arts Club, that could be. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a graduate student at New York Academy, but I graduated back in 2001. I was a student of Steve Assail and Martha Erlbacher, Vincent Desiderio. I had so many amazing teachers there. And then I also was a student of Jacob Collins at what is now the Grand Central Atelier, but back then was Water Street Atelier. So I know we got to know each other in New York City.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where it was, but that was fun.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because if the people that you mentioned as your mentors, there's quite a spread, a range of styles. So for instance, if you think about Stephen Assail, I studied with him as well, but only in a workshop. And the one thing that blew me away the first time I saw one of his pieces in person is from across the room, it looked like a very tight academic, tightly rendered painting. And then when I got on top of it, it was all abstract. And then he painted my portrait at this demo, and the theatrics and the slamming of paint and to try to get the paint to come off the brush in the right way. Paint was flying everywhere. It was a really wonderful experience. And then, so there's a big difference between, let's say, what Stephen does and what Jacob Collins does, which truly is a tightly rendered academic style of portraiture. And you've kind of landed in your own look and your own style. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that's true, that I had a lot of strong influences, very good teachers who were very different. And actually at the time when I was at New York Academy, it created a lot of tension for me, because I'd go into Jacob Collins' class and he'd be like, well, don't do it that way, you're doing it all wrong. And then I'd go into somebody else's class and they'd be like, well, don't do it that way, you're doing it all wrong. So I had to kind of individually figure out how to put that information together. But I feel really lucky that I was able to do so, because I feel like in a lot of ways I was able to get some of the best from each of those teachers. You know, the strong accuracy in the drawing and understand of form that was Jacob Collins and Ted Seth Jacobs. And then from Steve Assail, this really strong impact of color and light, and also looser handling and more open handling. And I always, even from a very young age, when I was first starting to study, I even then had a sense that I sort of wanted to, on one hand, sort of work like Tony Ryder, and on the other hand, work a little bit like Lucian Freud. And so I think in the early days, I spent a lot more time working on the more classical and academic part of that path, because it takes a lot of just practice and study and rigor. But then now that I've become a mature artist, I feel much more free to explore, you know, big messy paint splashes or big broad shapes of color. And I think one of the wonderful things about painting is that no matter where you are, you're still just developing and learning and feeling like you have so much to learn. So now I feel like I'm kind of really able to more fully integrate those different influences.
So talk to me about this this idea of painting portraits in plein air and figures in plein air, because you do that every summer. You take a group up to the woods somewhere and spend 3 or 4 days camping and painting. Tell us about that. I will pull up the images in a minute, but help us understand why you do that, why that's important to you.
Right. It is one of the greatest joys of my year. It's something I really look forward to for a lot of different reasons. What we do is that I hire a model to pose for 3 days in a row, and we do a morning session and kind of take a long lunch break, and then do an afternoon session for 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it's usually the first weekend in August. And I get a model who, you have to find somebody who's really intrepid, you know, they have to be able to deal with like the spiders and the mosquitoes, and maybe it's sunny and maybe it's rainy. But it pushes everyone to be creative. Sometimes we'll do a clothed pose because of setting, or just even creating kind of a design or a costume. It can be really fun. One time I had somebody posing with a parasol on a hill, just like Monet, you know. Other times we do full figure, and sometimes kind of try to set it up where it's under a tree cover, so the light will be relatively consistent, and other times in full sun. It's so different, and it throws me always out of my comfort zone. I'm always having to just like, oh my God, I feel like I've never painted anything before in my life, and now I just have to figure it out. It makes me work really quickly. It makes me throw paint around and throw my brushwork around. It makes me think about composition really dominantly, whereas when I'm in the studio, I might be really thinking about drawing and, you know, carefully trying to craft the form. And this kind of painting makes me really think about color, brushwork, composition. And it's also so much throws me out of my comfort zone that I have to just experiment and try new things. So then every year it helps me grow as a painter, because I'm really just during that period of time doing something that's so different from what I'm doing in my regular studio practice.
Well, what I'm going to do is see if I can find the let's see here. See if I can find the images. All right. So can you see this?
Yes, and I have a great story to tell you about this. So Eric, I sent 3, there's 2 of this setting of the boat, right?
Yes.
And there's 1, right? Okay, so let's start with this one so I can tell people what it looks like, what's happening here. So here's the model. We've set her in the boat. She's going to pose for 3 hours. There's about 7 of us who are like spread out around the pond, you know, painting from different angles. I have a good friend who I went to graduate school with. His name is Brooks Frederick, and he's a really terrific painter. And we both were talking about how much doing this kind of project really pushes us to try new things, and that how much we learn from each other, that when you're watching somebody else paint next to you, seeing the composition choices they're making or the brushwork they're doing, you're like, wow, I never would have thought to do it that way. And Brooks and I know each other pretty well, and we're pretty close, so we decided we would do a trade. And I started this painting for 20 minutes, and he started his painting for 20 minutes. And then for the rest of the pose, we just switched every 10 minutes.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's painting you showed on the screen of with the dog in it. That's my dog, Daisy. That's Brooks's composition that he set up, but then I painted into. And it's funny because we kept going back and kind of fixing things and correcting things. And then sometimes we'd go back and you'd have to, well, no, I really want it that way. And you'd change it back. And it became this artistic conversation between the two of us.
How fun.
And it was really fun. And fortunately, we really trusted each other. I was like, sure, whatever happens is going to happen. That'll be great. And we both learned a lot, and it was really energizing. So I know a lot of people who watch are also doing maybe plein air projects or painting together. And honestly, just try this sometime with a trusted friend who you like to paint with. It was really great. So then the third, do I have
I can go down and I don't know if I have.
Yeah, sorry. I tried to send these in some convenient. There is. Yeah, so this is actually a shot of all of the different sketches that everybody made during the paint out. Everybody made 6 or 7 or even 8 little paintings over the course of that 3 days. So we were all just working really hard, but also just having a great time being able to connect and paint together.
How fun. Now this shot here is just, you got more out on the picnic table. And
exactly. So at the end, the last day of the trip, we kind of get all the little sketches out, spread them out on the picnic table, and look at each other's work and talk about, what was our favorite thing or what did we learn. I think that for everyone going it, everyone learns a lot, and also just the opportunity to paint with other painters. And connect as a community is really, it gives us energy and inspiration for all the year.
You guys are camping, right?
Yeah, we're staying in tents. And I kind of have this pretty nice little outdoor kitchen set up where the kitchen kind of is on a deck with a little roof. So it's kind of glamping. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay, tell me about this piece here.
Yeah, so this, and I have it here in the studio too, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about the composition a little bit later. So this is the model posing under an apple tree. And in this case, we set her under the canopy of the branches so that then the light on her is dappled, but it was relatively consistent for that morning session. We did it from 10 a.m. to 9:30 to 12:30. So even though the sun was moving over the tree, the lighting condition on her was pretty consistent. It does change. I find anybody who does plein air knows that it maybe stays the same sometimes for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And usually by the end of 3 hours, it's really different. But just setting, she had this floral skirt and the yellow of her shirt. I loved the way it made these color harmonies with the landscape in the distance and the sunlight through the trees. So it was, I really liked the color composition of this.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. I'm just going to scroll down through. Okay. Here we have a shot of the model by the river.
Right. And so this one, and I'm going to see if later I have a photo of this, and I can talk a little bit about how I might use this information to go back to the studio, then to develop a more finished work. So that's another thing that I love about this project, is that I will do these sketches and really, come up with a compositional idea, study the light and color, but then you can gather resources, take some good reference photos, and go back to the studio, use all of your reference material to make a more finished work than at a slower pace.
Yeah.
So something else that I'll talk a little bit about that process.
All right. And this is the composition you did?
Right. And this one had to be really fast because it really started raining. So this was only about an hour and a half, which is not nearly enough time for a beautiful portrait. But what it will do for me is that I can use this as for all of the color information. Anybody who's done this kind of work and tried to like take a photo of that setting, and you get the photo home and it just doesn't really like feel the same. And so
Right.
what I do when I do this work is I'll try to quickly capture these color relationships and value relationships. And even if the drawing, it takes longer than an hour to paint a little portrait, but I can use that color study to develop the finished work.
All right. Okay, here's a picture of the apple tree with your palette and so on. So I'm going to pull out of this now and come back to you. All right. So you've got some teaching for us today. Why don't we go ahead and get into that? Tell us what you're going to do.
I am going to show you how to use, actually just with drawing materials. I'm going to just use paper and an ebony pencil, and then even maybe some vine charcoal to just do some quick composition thumbnail sketches, which is something I like to do when I'm first starting to figure out a composition. I think I can show this. I have some quick sketches that I did for this figure workshop. And so, just a very loose figure sketch that I did in my figure workshop. But what I want to show you today is how at the very first thing that I will often start with is a thumbnail or a black and white composition study, just to see how the shapes work. Because composition and the thumbnail, right? The thumbnail is sort of when you look at a composition from across the room, when you see it reduced into just a few inches, 2 inches by 3 inches. If the thumbnail of your composition is strong, then it's going to be strong in a big picture. And one of the things that I've been learning about right now is there's this thing called notan. And notan is from a Japanese term meaning just dark and light, black and white. And there's a wonderful composition book by Arthur Wesley Dow called Composition. It's actually an older book.
Yeah, I have it. It's great.
1914, and it's available for free on the internet from Project Gutenberg. So if people want to kind of go to the source with this, it's Arthur Wesley Dow Composition, and you can find it on the internet and download the PDF. It's great. And he teaches composition really well. And one of the things he talks about is the importance of notan. So instead of just thinking about the different, like a range of values in your composition, can you reduce it to just black and white? And I've learned that if the black, it makes you focus on the impact of your composition in a really reductive way. And then if you're able to find something that works in that format, then when you're adding color, you're adding texture, you're adding rich detail, it just keeps getting better. And because it holds up in that basic thumbnail design. So that's one thing I was teaching this week, is how to do that. So this is that sketch that I did in Pennsylvania. And I think that I can kind of show you a little bit the notan idea of how you might think about this composition. So I'm going to actually adjust this camera just slightly and bring you a little bit closer. I'm going to show you a few different things. One thing that's actually handy is that you can actually do a notan thumbnail quite small. I'm going to move my camera, so bear with me while I adjust it.
I have a question for you in the meantime.
Yep.
So you're out there in the woods in a campground, and you have, in some cases, you have an unclothed model.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that in terms of other people coming into the campsite or park rangers, that kind of thing?
No, we're on private land. We're in on 18 acres of private land. So there is no one else around in that space. Okay. And that's how it works. And then there are times like on that pond, there's a couple other properties that are on the edge of that pond. So then we will maybe have the model wearing, costume, clothes, hats. So sometimes we've moved into other settings where there might be people around, and then we will use costume, or depending on the comfort of the model and the setting. But the way this thing works is that it's about 18 acres of private land, and so you have a lot of space.
All right. Yeah, I guess I could do it on my property here.
Yeah. And I think sometimes if there's even just like one house, over in that direction, you can kind of set up in a way that that it's sort of private. Or,
Yeah. Well, we're essentially on an island, and nobody comes
Exactly.
here unless we see a boat coming. So.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, just come on up, bring a model, and we'll get started. All right. So
starting to do a thumbnail. Thumbnails are great, really small. And of course, I don't need my Metro card for the subway these days. So you can even use a credit card or something like this and just trace around it to kind of give yourself a little picture frame. Thinking about the composition. And actually, I brought some, I'm going to do it from this one. Let's see, I think you can see this. So you can see this is like a reference from that pond setting. And so that's also like when I was doing those sketches, I also was using my camera. I have a good digital SLR, Nikon camera. And so I'll also grab a lot of good photo references in case I really get excited. And so then in thinking about the no-tan, and it's also kind of a nice way to just sort of warm up and practice, because when you first start your composition, it can be a little nervous making, like, oh, I'm not sure exactly how I want to compose this thing. So just doing it in our really small scale gives you a way to kind of practice, like, oh, what's most important in this composition? And what's the placement? Sometimes in composition, it's really useful to think about intervals in the shape. So sometimes when I'm starting with
can you make those a little darker just for the camera?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'll make this one darker too as I'm developing it. So even just within this, I'll think about, well, what is the third, and divide it up that way, and then kind of use these intersection points as a good way to organize maybe the placement of the objects in my composition. So in thinking about that too, I kind of moved her over a little bit, but I'm still thinking about that. I'm going to put her a little bit to 1/3 the side over here, and then the hat here, and then the boat down here. And then there's this wonderful reflection of the trees in the background. And I'm going to make this even darker after I lightly sketch it in. But so what I'm seeing is that there's a dark shape with the boat. She's kind of a light shape against the boat. And this is making me think about what's in front and what's behind, and how do you define all the different shapes against each other in a composition. And it's helpful to be able to plan those out. And you see, I'm not even really worrying about making like a little detailed figure. I'm not really thinking about it as a drawing exercise. Just thinking about it as composition and shape. And so I can see that like the water is light here. The trees are dark here. And now I think I'll just start shading it in just to get a sense of what it's going to look like in value. Let me see. Her hat kind of comes up and is light, and that's useful. So let me see if I can fix that.
If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the comments section. You got people watching from all over, Patty. You got Saudi Arabia, you got Egypt.
That's amazing.
Where else we've got people are saying a lot throughout the United States.
So when I'm noticing like these shapes here, I'm like just doing this is helping me understand what's happening in my picture. Okay, the shape behind her is dark, and I kind of messed up my little picture, but the hat is light against the dark background. So that defines that shape nicely. Then she is dark against the white water, right? And the white shape. And then the boat sort of like is dark here. So you start to get this little interlocking set of light and dark shapes. And even in her, like there's a little edge of the light on her. And so this is a really good way to just start planning and thinking, how do I want to place these elements on my composition, and what's light and what's dark? And if you are able to kind of create a nice set of diagonals, thinking about making that diagonal of the boat, the placement of her, is a really useful way to just sort of warm up, and then when you're ready to like start your sketch, can do it a little bigger. And I also really recommend that you do maybe a few of these, like especially like can do them in 3 or 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes if you want to do it with a little more detail. And so plan out 2 or 3 of them, and then pick which is the strongest composition, thinking about like maybe a diagonal or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the no-tan is, instead of kind of using subtlety in the gradations, it's like, okay, what can I do, just thinking about maybe linear elements, black and white elements, and what is the simplest way to tell that story? Artists like Winslow Homer was a really amazing composer. And I think that one of the reasons he was so strong is that in his early days, he did illustrations for newspapers, which at that time was just black and white. So, he learned how to tell a story in just those compositional shapes. Doing something a little bit bigger.
Do you do this in the studio with models as well?
Yeah, actually, what I do is I'll often start with a model with just the drawing of the figure, because the drawing, right, it takes time. And, everyone's had that experience. You start your drawing and then you sort of run out of room for the arm, or you run out of room for the leg, and you can't quite fit it all on. So I'll actually start with just a drawing to just learn the pose and learn the placement. And then actually maybe after the model has gone home, I'll actually use my drawing to do some studies like this, because then I can do it just from memory.
Somebody asked, how do you make a choice of the value of the hat, whether light or dark, from the other drawing?
Because I'm thinking about definition. I'm thinking about, how do I make something read? And I think that's actually really important in composition. When you look at something from a distance, you want it to read from a distance. And so thinking about the value of the hat, I can see in the photo, I made it a little too dark there, but that the hat is light. And actually I remember from life that it would get this really bright, luminous highlight on the top of that thing. And that made it really pop out in front of the dark shape. So usually in thinking about dark and light, and is how do you define one part of the composition against another? And like here in the boat, for example, like her arm cuts across and the boat is dark behind. So if I make the arm light, the arm light and the boat dark, it's going to define those shapes against each other. And even if it's not really, you can adapt this to a really classical, very highly finished style, or you can adapt this to a much more impressionist style. But thinking about how you define one shape against another shape using light and dark really strengthens your composition.
Well, I really can see, just in looking at the no-tan that you did, I can really see the value of that. For instance, on the photograph, because of the angle, the trees are actually at an angle, and on the no-tan, they're straight. And when I saw the straight line, I thought, okay, would I want to keep it straight? Would I want to incorporate the angle there? So it really helps me make a decision on what direction do I want to go.
And that's such a good question. And I'm not, and that's I might do 2 of them, thinking precisely about that. And in fact, in mine, I kind of straightened out the boat just a little bit. And
can you pull up, you have that study?
This was the one that Brooks did from his angle.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Right.
Well, that's fascinating. I think that it's really great. Now, do you ever do color studies before you start in on your plein air study?
Well, no, because you don't have time.
Yeah.
So what I will do is, frankly, this is my color study. So, taking something like this and going back home to the studio, I can then take my time making a larger composition. Sorry, I'm going to move this a little bit.
No, you're doing great.
I can take my time making a larger composition and work out, how much detail in the drawing do I want to add. But when you print this photo, what happens in photos is that all of the lights get really bleached out. They get very high value, and you don't get a lot of contrast between maybe the value of this color and value here and the value of this color and value here. It almost turns into sort of like a black and white. So that's where my photo becomes really more confusing sometimes than helpful. So I can use the photo to really plan out carefully the drawing and placement of the composition. And then I can go back to my color study to adapt the colors that I observed from nature to make a more finished piece. So
I had an artist visit me one time, Nikolai Dubovik, who's a Russian master. He came up here to the lake. And he went into my studio, and I had all my work sitting out, and he went, that one, that one, and that one. And I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He said, those three were done in plein air. The others were done from photos. He could tell. And I couldn't even tell because I wasn't trained enough to do it. And that really reinforces the value of getting out there and painting outdoors, because photos are liars.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great to have that experience. It's only when you've sort of like done the work in life and even just like taken the photo, and then you go home and it makes you realize, oh, that's what's different. Photos, like I love to be, it's such a great resource, and to be able to go back and then slowly, carefully develop the drawing. But definitely the color and value relationships you really want to learn from life. It's really
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this is terrific. Do you want to just give us another notan? Do a notan on the one that you've got there, so we can kind of see that process once we can see a finished color work beside it.
Absolutely.
You willing to do that?
I can.
All right. I want to remind you guys that today we've got prizes, and prizes for your comments, and make sure you tell us in the comments where you're from. That's always helpful. And today we're giving away an easel brush clip, so it's a good prize today. And let's see, we've got some people watching now from England. Let's see what else. Patty, I'm just stalling while you're getting set up. So as soon as you're ready, somebody says there's a Notan app on your phone. I think Chong Wang has a new app that he released in Plein Air Live. That is, I think it's also a Notan app, but I think Laurie Putnam also had a Notan app. I don't know if it's still out there.
And apps, do they kind of take it from a photo, or is
you take a photo, and then you can turn it into a Notan.
I think that's genius, and it's great to be able to quickly look at use those apps. And I will do that in plein air too, and I did that at the paint out. Like I'll take my camera, and especially when you don't have a lot of time, I'll kind of take a few photos and then look at the photos to help make some choices first about like what composition I might want to do. But I gotta tell you, there's a lot of really important choices that are being made when you are just working not from the photo, and kind of, the photo isn't very smart, right? It always just sort of tells you exactly what's there. But as an artist, you really want to have the liberty to design your picture.
Right. So you may want to move a tree or a dark background that is never going to show up in a photo. But you can kind of create that, by having the pencil in your hand. That makes a huge difference.
And also the other thing that's amazing about working from life, doing like, these quick sketches, is that it really makes you observe and remember. I mean, it just gets it into your memory, what that experience was. and what the shapes were in a way that, like, when you just snap a photo, it doesn't get in your head. So when you take the time to make a little sketch or a study, even if it doesn't really turn into like art, if it's not sort of a beautiful thing, it really serves as this great memory aid for you, for just as a souvenir, remembering that experience. And also as a resource for like then going back to the studio and remembering what you like about a picture.
Yeah.
So as we're talking, I'm just kind of starting to sort of sketch in, and I'm just blocking in. Often when I start making a placement, you can see I'm just using long, straight shapes and lines instead of trying to get into a refined contour. And just using these long, straight block-in lines. And I might, I might even change this a little bit. This was thinking about moving forward, like if I wanted to really develop this, maybe there are things from my sketch that I could change and refine. So this one thing I loved about this, where I was looking, was the way that it had these layers of like light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And the no-tan can really help me understand that better.
So there's a temptation to put in the gradation, the shadows, the midtones and so on. Why is it important in the no-tan not to do that?
Because it actually just helps it focuses you on value instead of color. And I've been thinking a lot about this line, color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. Right. And people often struggle like, oh, my color just doesn't look strong. Almost 90% of the time that actually the problem is actually not a color problem. It's actually a value problem. So if and the black and white, the no-tan just being so simple, it makes you reduce. And actually that's one of the other really hard things about doing plein air work, as everybody knows, is there is just so much information, right? And so how do you reduce? And so the no-tan also forces you to simplify. And just like in that other one, we were talking about the hat in the foreground or the arm cutting across the dark. How do you use simple shapes that read from a distance to organize the parts of your composition? So I've made the little placement for this, and I'm actually going to start with all the dark shapes. As far as no-tan, the only thing that's a little tricky about this, because she is all in shadow,
she's
and
mid-tone,
her face is all in mid-tone, is that I'm going to kind of lose the definition of her in my sketch. Whereas in my finished painting, I actually kind of would want to have her really shown, her face and her arm as a mid-tone in this composition. But I still like the no-tan as a place to start, because it really, if it's strong, then I can add the subtleties. I can use color and sort of mid-tones and subtle compositions. And her skirt was kind of white, so maybe I can kind of start to use that to sort of define the skirt against the background. So I've just put her whole body, her whole arm, in shadow. And then now I'm thinking about the composition of just the shapes and maybe thinking about increasing the angles a little bit. So maybe actually I'm going to lower this down and change it a little bit from my painting to make this shape a little bit more of a dynamic angle instead of quite so straight across.
This is why this is so helpful, because you're composing. I mean, how many hundreds of times have you done a painting and, you make these decisions while you're painting and you're ended up moving the body or moving the sky or moving the background. And it's just such a hassle. So to do it this way, it's so valuable.
Right. So here you see, I kind of changed in my sketch the darkness a little bit because I'm thinking about this issue of definition. And I could you could, it's easy to imagine thinking about a composition. What if the light broke through and sort of hit the bottom of her skirt? Oh, you can't
We
even.
can't see her. You could pull that up a little higher. Now, the one thing that's also valuable is squinting. Because
Absolutely.
when I squint at that that image of the painting, really her blouse is in light. It's mid-tone, but it's still in light versus the rest of it is, you know, you can see the blacks.
Sorry, I did something to my camera. Now it's wobbly. Yeah, and so that, yeah, it's squint, and that's, boy, that way I really learned from Steve Assail. You know, he would walk up to your canvas and sort of like take all of your subtle detail and put up like cadmium yellow pale and like phthalo blue to make this really strong impact of light and shadow. And I think that's why this no-tan is so useful. You know, it makes you squint and it makes you simplify. And if you can make a composition that reads like that, you're like, oh, this is a person. She's standing under an apple tree. These were like these plants, right? These like flowers. So that's the kind of thing that like even the no-tan, you can start to think about definition. And then these were like the flowers kind of coming into the light over here. And then this is the shadow of the tree again. So it's like light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And focusing on the no-tan makes you simplify and think about how those shapes work. Now this kind of thing up here with this tree, this is a little harder to sketch in because what was really lovely about this was these shapes of the leaf and the apple as it's like cutting against the dark. But if I took some time here and sort of like showed these big leaves in this very light shape, you know, coming forward, and even there was places, let me see, can I pull it out? The way the leaf in the light, oh, it's hard to erase because I'm using this super dark pencil. But the way that the leaf cutting, like as the contrast of the leaf against her made it really, really beautiful. And that's, I think, what Arthur Wesley Dow in his in the composition book was talking about, the value of the no-tan, is that just the harmony created by these little patterns of light and dark, it's really, I think it's very satisfying to the eye. I think it's delightful to the eye. And so if you can find something that really like has that act, you know, that stimulates your eye in that really pleasing way, it can be the foundation of a really beautiful painting. So
okay,
here we are.
I'm going to ask people to, if they have any questions, to chime in because we only have a few minutes left. So get your questions in now if you have any.
So here I've kind of simplified, you know, my sketch down to the basic pattern of light, dark, light, dark. It's also taught me something. Like sometimes you think you understand a sketch, but it's only when you start actually painting and drawing that you really realize, oh, that's what's going on here. So I want to make sure that I show the bright sunlight on the top, on the leaves up here, the shadow underneath the canopy of the tree, and then these receding planes of light in the distance. And those little layers, I always think about layers in composition, like what's in the foreground, what's in the middle ground, what's in the background. And using those light, dark as layers to understand the composition really help.
Somebody had to ask a question dealing with the mid values. I know you addressed it earlier, but will you just touch on it real quickly again?
What's the question? Dealing with the mid values, like how would I define them?
Yeah, because you're in this, you're just doing dark and light. You're not really showing the mid values.
So, so what I would be thinking about in here is that as I'm developing my painting, I still want to capture this, especially when you're painting the condition of sunlight and you get a really strong impact of light, dark, that I would develop the tone, the color in her face and her hair. But color is amazing. You can get a red that's a dark red. You can get a green that's a dark green. You can even kind of get a yellow that's a dark yellow. So just doing the no-tan is kind of teaching me that I can add color, but I need to keep the values really low.
Yeah.
So you can start using color, yellow against the orange, against the, to start divining shape and get more detail without actually breaking up the value impact. And that's a really good key to like strong composition.
Okay, another question that came out. If you joined in late, we showed some pictures that Patty was doing models in nature, right? So I'll just show those again real quickly. They had a model outside, several models over several days, doing different compositions in nature. Patty, the question was, where does somebody find models who are willing to do this?
This is something that, frankly, I work on all year. So I know now that next August, I'm going to need a model who I'm going to want to work with. So during the course, of course, I have models that I've worked with, and I could go back, but I do like the variety of finding a new person that I've not used before. So from now until next August, as I'm maybe doing figure sketching and starting to meet models, I often ask them, do you like to camp? Are you an outdoorsy person?
Right.
And I also think a lot about, because we're going to spend 5 days together, and I want to know what their personality is like. So I will, I'm lucky enough, I have in New York City, there's a lot of models, get people into the studio, and they might not know that I'm interviewing them for the job at the PA paint out, but usually over the course of like the next 5 or 6 months, I'm starting to really pay attention. So like, I bet she would be, or he.
No, but what about it in the city? There's a in New York City, there's an easy resource for models, right? There's a model agency, or is it
there are online agencies. I don't think they're even just in New York City. There's like Model Mayhem, which is an online model resource, Model Mayhem, where actually I have several times used that. And I think they're nationwide.
Okay.
Mostly I get my models through word of mouth. I mean, that's the luxury of being in a figurative community. Yeah. I'll tell you, most of us are, we teach, and we are easy to find. And so honestly, you can also just, if you know a figurative artist in your area, they will probably be able to, give you a few references.
All right. Well, Patty, this has been delightful. Thank you for doing this for us today. There's a bunch more questions, but unfortunately we're going to run out of time. And but how can people reach you? How can they learn more about you?
I'm easy to find. Patricia Watwood. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, Patricia Watwood, and my website is patriciawatwood.com. During the pandemic, I started doing a Facebook Live teaching segment. So instead of doing my lessons, in the studio, I started doing my demonstrations on Wednesdays on Facebook for free. My private students, then I do one-on-one mentorship with them separately. So that is something I'm doing. You can find me on Facebook. I will be starting that back up in September. So I'm easy to find there. Eric, I want you to know how helpful your daily podcasts and all the things you've been sharing. It's all of us, we have to stay motivated and we have to stay positive. And you have been doing this from day one, and I have been watching you, and you have been helping me so much. And I think you've been helping everyone. You are just so energetic, and you're positive, and you're optimistic. And it makes me feel like, all right, I'm going to get out there. I'm going to get back in my studio. I'm going to get back to work. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Patty. That's very sweet. Hopefully we'll get a chance to go painting again soon someday.
I would absolutely love to do this figure and plein air thing with you up in the Adirondacks. I know we've talked about it a little bit.
Well, I'm here, so come on up.
Absolutely.